Guys, welcome back to the Chief Life Podcast. I am Matthias Turner, and today I'm super pumped. I've got Krishna Kaliannan with me from Catalina Crunch. Dude, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited for this. I mean, you've got quite the backstory that kind of led into you figuring out, you had your problem, you figured it out how you could kind of move forward with it, and then have built it into a business to kind of keep growing it. And I think that's really exciting because you've come from a pain point, you've figured out how to make it a joyful point almost, and then created a life and a business off of it, and probably helped a whole heap of other lives because of it, because you figured out a solution. So, I mean, Catalina Crunch you guys do cereal. So how does one come to creating cereal?
Good question, man. Great question. And I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, the number one reason I do it is to help other people. So, that's the most gratifying part. So I appreciate you calling that out. But yeah, no, I mean, it was a long process, to be honest. It is not easy to launch a new product. I think a good part of it was naivete, to be honest, about exactly how hard it was going to be. And if I realized up front how hard it was going to be and how long it was going to take, I might have reevaluated, whether or not I actually did it. But nevertheless, I kind of, persevered, if you will. I'm kind of like one of those people that once I start something, I'm not going to give up on it, for better or for worse. So I was kind of just one part after another. But I mean, I'm trying to think. So it was about 2 years ago, and I was just fed up, basically, eating hard-boiled eggs for breakfast, because that's what I've been eating for a long time. And I'm on a kind of keto eating regimen, and so there's not a lot of options for breakfast. And my girlfriend has been eating, we're in New York City, so she's eating acai bowls for breakfast, or fruit smoothies, or bagel sandwiches, and all this stuff that tastes amazing, but it just has a lot of either carbs or sugar. And so I I stay away from that stuff. And so I mean, the way it started is I started baking it in my kitchen, and it was just for me. I had gone through the grocery store, see. Oh, we got your dog joining us?
Sorry.
No problem.
Dog next door.
He can join in.
Yeah, she wants to.
Get his take as well. So I'm sure he can tell the struggles of difficulty with breakfast. I don't know what you're feeding him,
exactly.
But
Same
dog
thing
food
every
is not he wants the acai bowl too. But yeah, so I mean, I had just started baking it out of my kitchen, and what had happened was I'd gone down the cereal aisle one day. I had kind of got this wave of nostalgia over me, and I thought, I wonder if I can make basically like a nutritious version of Cocoa Puffs. And I had been doing a little bit of low carb baking before that. And I kind of realized, once you get into baking a little bit, it's just like you're making a dough. Then you're taking your dough, you're baking your dough, and then out comes the product and you eat it, right? And most of the times you're baking something, like I was baking crackers. So I'm adding salt, obviously, and it's getting it a salty flavor, like a spicy flavor. And I just realized, if I just take out the salt, and I add, cacao at that time was what I was thinking about to make it chocolatey. Maybe I can something that that tastes like Cocoa Puffs. And so that's how it got started. And so I was baking it out of my own kitchen for about 3-4 months. And then what happened was a friend of mine, actually, he wanted to try the product because he had gone on keto. He had gotten unhappy with just eating eggs every day for breakfast as well. And so he tried it. I actually gave him like a Ziploc baggie with this cereal, which I had made out of my kitchen, and he put it in like some almond milk, I think, like I was doing, and he started eating it for breakfast. And it wasn't that great at the time, but honestly, like when you've just eaten eggs every day for like years and years, and it's like anything is different that's good, And so he started eating it. The funny thing was he actually Venmo'd me for it. And then I got some of like his friends also eating it. And then it became, because I was like baking it on the weekend. So, there became a point where I was like, at first it was just for me, and then it was like for me and a little for him. And then it sort of became a thing where I was like, all right, I'm now actually doing like a whole second batch of cereal just for these other people. Like I got to think about what I'm doing here. And that's when I decided to turn it into a business.
That's cool.
And Yeah, and then after that, to the rest of your question, I think the thing that I didn't realize was that when you go from doing something into your kitchen to doing it for consumers, all over the country, it's a totally different beast, right?
Yeah.
First of all, you got to learn, like, you can only make so much out of your kitchen, and so when you're trying to make 1,000 times that much, you just can't do it in the kitchen anymore, right? And so you need to get more space, you need to get more ovens, you need to get more baking equipment, you need to get chefs to help you, right? And so then there becomes this hiring component, and then you start thinking, well, there's also like food regulations as well, right? Like, you can't just bake it out of your kitchen and then sell it to people across the country. And so there's that, and this just kind of goes on and on. But so there's a whole process that took me about a year, actually, which was learning, how are we going to do this on on a larger scale, and so that we can actually do it for other people.
Yeah.
And so that was a big learning process.
And I think there's a lot of legalities that probably people don't understand as well when it comes to high production rate and the big space kitchens, like the rules and regulations that you need to follow when you're in those as well. Can be like almost overwhelming to start with the things you have to cover. I actually had a client who used to make cakes. She was going into the business of making cakes. She was in the corporate world, and she was getting so busy that she ended up hiring a space just so she could do the commercial kitchen. And the amount of like loops she had to jump through just to get that rolling as a part-time thing was just crazy.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, there's a lot. I remember when I first was working out of a commercial kitchen. They they want. It's almost like it's like you're signing a lease with the kitchen. You're paying a deposit. You're agreeing to work out of there for a certain number of months. You're agreeing not to bring certain foods with certain allergies into the facility, right? Like, you're agreeing to clean things properly, like store things properly. It's a whole thing. It's difficult because there are some people who are very clean, obviously, but then there are other people who are not clean. But when you're working in a shared kitchen, like, you can't have someone who's just like leaving their stuff all around, right?
No.
Like, you can't you don't want to walk into the kitchen and then like see that like there's burnt bread in the oven, or like there's like goop on the floor. Like, you don't want any of that, right? So it's a very difficult process, and they screen people and things like that. Yep.
And I mean, a product like yours, where you're gluten-free, grain-free, cross-contamination is obviously a big thing. And I think something that people don't really recognize is how much cross-contamination there is within the world. Even if the product says gluten-free, it only has to pass a test that's 99.7% gluten-free, I believe. So there's still a chance that you are getting a little bit of cross-contamination. Is that the same for the States? I'm not sure about what 99.7% comes out to, but the law in the States is less than 20 parts per million gluten. Okay.
And I think they're thinking about lowering it actually to 10 parts per million gluten. But you're absolutely right. There is the possibility. If you're working out of an oven, and the person who was previously in that oven was baking, bread using wheat flour, and then you come into that oven and you start baking out of that oven, there's a possibility that some of the wheat that got, that stayed on the baking pan or whatnot, if not cleaned properly, or even if cleaned properly, could cross-contaminate. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, before you guys had your own like warehouse-style bakery sections, were you having to deal with that? Like, was there ever a chance where you had cross-contamination that you kind of just said, well, hell, that's like a whole section I just need to throw away now?
No, we never had to throw product away.
Okay.
Basically what we did is, so we're in our own bakery right now, because we're just like selling like crazy, to be honest. So we didn't know, a long time ago, we had to get rid of the shared bakery solution. So we have a massive bakery, and a whole bunch of folks working out of the bakery. And so now there's no, because we're only baking the cereal, we don't have to worry about cross-contamination. We don't bring in any other sorts of, we're not bringing wheat flour in because we're not making any other products or anything like that. Previously, when we were in the shared kitchen, we did not advertise the product as gluten-free or grain-free.
Okay.
And if someone emailed us and they asked us, hey, does your product contain gluten? My response would always be, well, if you have celiacs, then I don't recommend, then don't buy it because there's a chance of cross-contamination. Yep. But now that we're in our own facility, we can 100% guarantee that we are, gluten-free, grain-free, and perfect for folks who have any of those sorts of allergies.
No, dude, that's cool. And I mean, something that we haven't touched on yet is the actual pain point that kind of changed your lifestyle around, which is type 1 diabetes. Can you kind of take us through like your whole life of living with diabetes? Like how did that come about, and how have you kind of lived with it, and what are the changes that you've had to make and sacrifices potentially that people would say sacrifices, but realistically some people would also see it as a gift. It's like, hey, well, I've got this thing now, I get to actually really look after myself. So what's it been like living with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, great question. I was diagnosed about 10 years ago. I was actually a senior in high school at the time, going into my freshman year of college. And it was right when I made that transition, actually, that I was diagnosed. So it was very difficult at first, emotionally, because parents are far away, and your whole support system, right? You're going through college, like you don't know anyone, you're making new friends, right? And so it was difficult, obviously, and very angering at times to have this disease put on me while I was in like a life transition process in general, right? Like I was like thrown into the deep end, and then on top of it, given a rock called diabetes to swim with, you know what I'm saying? So that was frustrating. I remember, just being angry, feeling that life's not fair, I remember thinking, why is it, we have all these like freshmen in college, why is it that I got to deal with this disease? You know what I'm saying? I was not happy about that, obviously. I was, and I think that extended onto, to a certain extent, also thinking like my parents are so far away, I can't get as much help from them. And so that was definitely challenging. I think you gradually get used to it, though, obviously, because it can't go on that way forever. And you kind of learn ways to make your life easier. And that's really what, I think like keto and low carb did for me. Was I realized if I don't eat a lot of carbs and I don't got to take a lot of insulin, it makes it much easier to control my blood sugars and also manage my budget too, because insulin's expensive, right?
So can I stop you real quick there? When you first found out you had diabetes, did they take you through that, though? Did they explain like, hey, you should not eat extra carbs and inject extra insulin? Or was it like, just eat whatever you want and inject the extra insulin?
Yeah, so it was interesting. They did not press, like, for me, I feel personally like if you're a type 1 diabetic and you're not, and you've never tried low carb, I think it's like a godsend, because it just makes managing diabetes so much easier. But it's funny because, when I was doing this, the nutritionists, they have these special diabetes educators that are like nutritionists certified in diabetes management. And they teach you to count the number of carbs you're going to eat and then take insulin based on the number of carbs that you're going to eat. And so they do warn you, avoid sugary soft drinks and avoid like candy and things like that, because they are going to spike your blood sugar, which is to say that, you can take, X amount of insulin for the amount of candy you're going to eat. But the problem is the insulin will work over like a 2-hour period of time, whereas like the candy will come into your system and it'll spike your blood sugar over like the course of like 10 minutes. And so those two don't match, right? And so your blood sugar will go up and then it'll kind of come back down. So they teach you to avoid things like that. They also teach you about the glycemic index or glycemic load, is a way for understanding if things are likely to spike your blood sugar or not. But to be honest, they never told me to explicitly think about reducing the number of carbs in my diet. I think some of the things that they said were things like eat, like whole grain wheat flour or whole grain wheat bread instead of white bread, for example, which is better. I mean, because whole grain bread tends to have a little bit more fiber and a little bit more protein than like white bread does. But it's obviously, I think, relatively marginal.
Exactly. It's still not that favorable a food.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's still like a ton of carbs, obviously, in any number of the whole grain breads that are on the market. It's. I think they should do a better job of talking to folks about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think like the reason I asked that is because I know plenty of diabetics who literally got told, "Hey, don't worry about adjusting what you eat. Just we'll make sure you're getting enough insulin every day to make sure that your sugar levels are fine. Like, it's no worries." The other issue that we come across with some diabetics is that they're afraid to reduce the carbohydrates because of the energy shift, and it seems very similar to what a low would seem like. So it's like that transition period of potentially going from a higher carbohydrate diet to transitioning into a lower carbohydrate diet where you're switching from being a carb burner to being more of a fat burner. That can seem I guess it seems very similar to what a low might feel like. So therefore, it can almost scare them to even try it. It's like, oh no, I tried that. I tried that for a day and it wasn't very successful for me as a person. Like my energy levels were way too low and I can't do that. Do you remember what your transition period was like?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think it's funny because when I was diagnosed, actually, I talked to some diabetics I knew or didn't know, but then actually came to find out were diabetic once I told them that I was diabetic. And one of the things I found was a lot of diabetics just eat the same thing every day, because it makes it super easy. Then you don't have to do any calculations, you don't have to do any worrying or any guessing, right? You're just like, okay, I'm eating the same ham sandwich that I ate yesterday, that I ate the day before, that I ate the day before, and I know I need to take 4 units of insulin for this sandwich, and like it makes things simple, right? If you're changing it up a lot, it's obviously difficult. And so I think especially I could definitely see you're talking to someone who's been eating the same ham sandwich every day for lunch for the last 10 years is going to be very hesitant to change it up because that's the reason why they're doing that, right? It makes life simple. For me, the transition was not seamless, I would say, by any means. It definitely took a bit of experimenting, because basically for me, and I think for most type 1 diabetics, you take 2 types of insulin, right? You take this short-acting insulin, which is what you take right when you eat, and then that works over a 2-hour period of time. And then you take this long-acting insulin, or like bolus, which will act over a 24-hour period of time. And so what happens is if you cut down a lot on the number of carbs you're eating, and then you also say do a little bit of exercise, you are going to be in a place where you're probably going to experience lows, because you're probably taking some long-acting insulin to counter some of the carbs that you're eating throughout the day, even though you don't realize you're doing that. So I think it's likely to happen. So if you're gonna kind of do that transition, I think it's smart to reduce the amount of long-acting insulin that you're taking as you kind of change, up your eating regimen. But no, for me, it was not like super seamless. There was definitely periods where, I used to eat I remember I used to eat like Subway sandwiches for lunch, for example. And, like the Subway sandwich bread has like a ton of carbs in it, right? And it's long too, it's like a whole foot, right? So it's a lot of bread. And then I went to getting rid of that, and I started eating like the sandwich, but I would buy the meats from the store and then eat it without the bread, and sometimes I would like wrap it in lettuce or whatnot. So you go from like a ton of carbs to no carbs whatsoever. And the first day that I did that, I was like feeling just low the whole day, and like I remember taking no insulin, no short-acting insulin, but still leaving that meal low. And then what I realized over time was that I had to drop the amount of long-acting insulin I was taking. So
no, that's really good. That's very insightful. I think that could help a few people out, definitely.
I hope so.
Yeah, that's cool. And so, for you guys, like obviously fast track down to where we are now, like you've got a company that's now running, you're providing a cereal for people all over the world, I would believe. Like where do you actually send to? Is it literally international, everywhere?
No, we just send into America right now.
Okay, cool.
Good question.
No, that's cool. That's
it's like it's unfortunately like super expensive, and or takes a long time to ship it. Like to Europe, for example, or to Australia or anything like that. So we are just in America right now. I think like at some point we would start shipping the product to other countries. We'd have to find another company to work with, like that we could ship the product to in like containers, for example, and then they would actually ship it to the final consumers. So cool. For us right now, we just send it out to folks in America. Okay,
cool. But I think there's a lot of insights that I think we can really kind of play on here, because typically in the Western world, we're marketed that you need to be eating something like cereal for breakfast. And it seems almost weird to be eating something such as meat or something such as eggs every single day. Like a cooked breakfast, people will happily go out to a cafe and have a cooked brekkie. But when it comes to eating at home every day, so many people still have that mindset of, well, I have to be eating cereal. It's just that quick, easy option. It's cereal or it's toast, and that's kind of like the Western world breakfast. What are some of the potential, I guess, hidden secrets or hidden things that we need to look out for when it comes to eating just a regular cereal? Like, what are the tricks or the things that we need to be cautious of when it does come to that style of food?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right. I mean, ever since cereal was invented in like the late 1850s, they have been hammering that message home over and over and over again. And yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. Obviously, I think for whatever reason, folks can be really hesitant to look at the label on the back of the box to actually see what's in the cereal. And I think that's something that it's just like so easy to just like, I don't want to really look at that. I'm just not going to look at it.
I just really like the taste, so I won't worry.
Yeah, just don't worry about it, And so that's exactly where you get caught is when the company creates a sort of packaging that makes it seem like you're getting a very good and nutritious meal, as long as you don't look at the nutrition facts, right? Yeah. And then you look at the nutrition facts and you're like, oh man, this is a lot different than I thought it was. So I mean, I think you can solve most of your problems that way. One of the things that like cereal companies will do, for example, is that they'll make their serving sizes small in order to reduce the perceived amount of sugar in the product. Yeah. So they'll like choose the serving size so that they get like 9 grams of sugar in the product, and so it doesn't seem like a terribly large amount. But then in reality, like because it's not filling at all, you'll end up eating like 5 times that. Literally.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a big one. I think another one is. This is an interesting one. Is I actually talked to a friend who was eating Raisin Bran for breakfast, and he thought Raisin Bran is like an adult marketed cereal. It's not like a kid cereal, right? It's not like a Cocoa Puffs or whatnot.
Yeah. Do you guys call it Just Right over there?
No, we do not.
That's like the Australian branding of Raisin Bran is Just Right.
Oh, interesting. Just Right. Okay. Interesting. So we have Raisin Bran over here, and he'd actually thought that he wasn't really eating that much sugar because not every bite has a raisin, right? And I think in our Raisin Bran, the raisin is actually coated in sugar too, so it's like even more sugary. But at any rate, if you don't put a raisin on your spoon, you're just eating like some wheat flakes, right? Yeah. But if you actually look at the back, then he looked at the back and was surprised to see that Raisin Bran has almost as much sugar as like a Cocoa Puffs or one of those other cereals does. You just don't perceive it that way, right? Yes. So that's like that's another one. I mean, there are some other tricks that companies are using. Like I found this to be very disingenuous. Is like Cocoa Puffs, for example. They put on the front, like in big letters now, it says like no high fructose corn syrup, and so they have like 3 things which are going to make you think that it's okay for you. One of them being no high fructose corn syrup. Yeah. But if you look at the ingredients on the back, they have both fructose and corn syrup as separate ingredients. So they're still, they just took what was high fructose corn syrup and put it in 2. You know what I'm saying?
And it's not lying, but it's just marketing. Separate. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
So you gotta watch out for that. Watch out for that all the time. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, something that we have here in Australia, I don't know if you guys have it in the States, is like a health tick. So it's like a rating from the government to say this food is good. We've also got like there's a National Heart Foundation that will put their stamp of approval on a few things. The only issue being is that what they tended to do is go for low-fat items, which tend to mean that they're high sugar or higher in sugar. They were giving their tick of approval on all of these styles of foods and saying, hey, this is a good quality food for you. We give it the health tick. People go and then probably eat too much of it. They're like, well, it's healthy for me, so I'll eat plentiful amounts of it. And then they fall into that trap of the spiral that kind of sends you down. It's already spiking your energy too high. You get an overdose of insulin. You get a drop in your mood, a drop in your energy, and then you go craving something else for high sugar again. And that just starts that perpetual cycle for the day. Yeah. Is that something that you guys have in the States, the ticks of approval?
We do not have ticks of approval, no. But we have the same sort of issue, which is, you're absolutely right, is like for many, many years, I think like between the 60s and the 90s, fat was marketed as like makes you fat, and sugar was marketed as like not actually. I was looking back at previous ads,
Yep.
and they used to market sugar as like a great source of energy, basically. So it was like a good thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And even like sucrose and fructose were especially marketed heavily as like, they were like, this is like energy that's been refined, and it's like it's like pure energy. You know what I'm saying? And so it had a very positive connotation. And so people were eating these low fat things, thinking that they were going to get something. It is good, it's just low in fat. But obviously, if you take the fat out, you got to put something else in it, right? I mean, or else what is it just going to be, like air? Like you got to put something there. And so they're replacing it oftentimes with sugar. And so we have a similar issue. We don't have the check mark, but we have a similar issue where the government, the FDA, many of the rules and regulations, kind of what's baked into it or has been baked into it for a long time is the idea that, like low fat things are, good for you versus regular fat things. So that has, been pushed for a long time. And that, can be constraining for companies as far as like, there are instances where the packaging is, very regulated. And so companies, have restrictions that they have to follow. And like there are certain things, like if your product has a certain amount of saturated fat, for example, that kind of disqualifies you from putting certain statements on the front of your packaging, which might otherwise, make your product seem healthy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so they do, so there's no like necessarily like government stamps of approval, but they do, for example, like if you want to put a picture of like a heart on your packaging and say that it's heart healthy, like it has to meet certain requirements in order.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I think a lot of the confusion came from back in the day when they were doing their studies. They used to put sugar and fat together with most of the studies they did. They never did them just by themselves. And that's where a lot of the issues came, where they said, well, every time we have sugar by itself, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But when we put sugar and fat together, that's when we see it as a really bad connection. And realistically, you can eat it. That's fine. Like fats are really healthy, and carbohydrates are not a bad thing. You just need to figure out what the balance is when it comes to it. And unfortunately, because there was that drive for fats make you fat for so long, it really did push up that carbohydrate intake. I mean, I would say that there's definitely, in the world, there's definitely carb burners, there's definitely fat burners, and you can definitely transition yourself to be one or the other. You can train your body to be able to adapt to the foods that it's eating to some extent, because obviously there's foods that are causing inflammation within the body. And I would say that those foods are the foods that most people need to be keeping away from. And that's where your cereal, the product that you guys have created, is a really good product, because it is a food that is really good and nourishing in people, but it's also low in inflammation. You're not going to eat that food and come out feeling bloated or come out feeling crappy from it. Was that obviously something that you were trying to think of when you were creating the product, or was it just like, hey, I'm gonna keep to the keto realm, and it just so happened that it turned out to be nice and healthy anyway?
No, I was thinking about that because the reason is I actually. Senior year of high school, which was an awful year for me from a medical perspective. Yeah. I actually tore my ACL, PCL, and MCL. Yeah. How? In an accident. I was actually, it was the stupidest thing. I came back home from a dinner with my parents. Yeah. And we were doing construction at the time in the garage. And we had a cat at the time, and the cat wouldn't come into the garage. And that usually means that there's like another animal in the garage, so the cat won't come in. And so we thought there might have been like a raccoon or something hiding behind this like whole bunch of drywall we had stacked up. Yeah. And I didn't realize how heavy the drywall was, so I kind of tried to like edge it backwards. And I just ended up, it just all fell on top of me. And so I twisted over, fell over, and tore, completely three of the ligaments.
Wow. And I was going to say, like, that's a hard thing to do, is tear all three in one hit. Like, you must have done a good job.
Yeah. It was not smart. And so after, as a result of that, when you tear those ligaments, you got to get cadavers put in, and then you go on this physical therapy program where you start to, get your range of motion back, right? Mm-hmm. And now I have like kind of a situation where I have almost all my range of motion, but it is like very much prone to arthritis as a result of all the kind of dead tissue, which is built up in there. Yeah. And so what's happened for me is that like inflammation causing foods and or foods that I'm allergic to I actually feel it in my knee first.
Straight up. Yeah.
And because it's like it's been injured before, I feel it like more acutely than I think I otherwise would. Like because I'm young and in good health, thankfully. I have the luxury, or I would have had the luxury, I think, of more or less eating kind of whatever it is that I wanted to without like getting joint pain, for example, right? But now like I will get joint pain in my knee if I like drink beer, for example, and so I stay away from beer, and that's the kind of thing. And red wine does the same thing for me, and so that was another thing that I was thinking about. It's like added sugars, that sort of thing as well can cause this sort of pain for me in my knee. So it's always a part of like what I'm looking to eat and looking to avoid and whatnot.
I think that's really important. Something that people don't really correlate that often is your body is incredibly smart, and it'll always give you those signs and symptoms. And things such as joint pain, things such as bloating, things such as like diarrhea or constipation, like they're all signs from your body, even down to like skin issues. Like if you've got a high amount of pimples, it tends to be due to what you're eating, like the foods that you're putting in. There's something that's not agreeing well with you. It's really, really crazy to see like how incredibly smart the body is with giving you signs. Just whether you choose to listen to them or not is the big thing.
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's funny. My dad used to tell me the story when he was in his early 30s. He's a veterinarian. He would go out on Sunday nights, and play tennis with a buddy. And they would go out, they'd play tennis, and then they would like have pizza and beer. And Monday morning, he would always come into work kind of like sniffling. But he never really put two and two together about that until one day his receptionist was like, "Hey, Dr. Kali, every time you come into the office on Monday morning, you're sniffling. Like, what are you doing on Sunday?" And he's like, "What am I doing on Sunday?" And then he put it together and he realized, well, eating that pizza and drinking that beer was giving him those symptoms, right? So you're right. It's like not necessarily easy. It's easy to overlook, in other words, right? And you got to be looking for it, I think, sometimes, and like kind of attuned to what your body's trying to tell you. I mean, it's a great point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the other thing of that is, like, this is from a reverse look at it, where I'm pretty gluten and dairy intolerant, yet my parents will still think, hey, no, it's all right, I can get away with this stuff. I'm like, well, no, I'm your genetics. Like, I come from you guys. There's a fair chance that when you eliminate this stuff and reintroduce it, that you're going to have the exact same side effects that I'm having. You just need to find that new normal. And it's interesting trying to get their head around it as well. Like, obviously your parents never really listen to the kids that much, and mine do. Like, they do take everything on board. But it's just like trying to really, I guess, knuckle it in and nail it home that it's a forever thing. It's not just a when you want to thing as well. And it's but that dip and like that bread and dip just looks really nice. I might just try it today. Then they get the side effects, but it doesn't worry them as much. Like, it's not that thing that kind of sits home. And for me, like, even though I guess for me, I'm always about performance. I'm always trying to think, like, how can I perform better? I know if I eat or drink something like that's then going to affect my gut or my brain for the next week, and that's something that I'm not on for. I'm like, nah, that's like a non-negotiable for me. But for someone like themselves, they're happy to potentially have that little bit of discomfort for the week, even if it does throw them out. And I'm like, no deal for me. So it's interesting, and I think realistically, when it comes to nutrition, it really does come down to mindset. Like, a lot of the side of it is people either get something like type 1 diabetes and say, poor me, why have I been dealt this hard card? Or people look at it and see the silver lining, like, okay, cool, well, I'm going to run with this. I'm going to roll with it. I'm going to make sure that I'm thriving as an individual. I know that these things that I do will take me to a lower point, whereas these things that I do can really kind of lift me up. And so it's really, realistically, comes down to, I think a lot is mindset when it comes to nutrition. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, I look back now on like diabetes, for example, is what got me interested in nutrition in the first place. I don't think there's a world in which I would have started Catalina Crunch if I wasn't diabetic. And we're employing almost 20 people now, and it's like it's a great experience for me. I love it. I couldn't be happier. So I gotta thank diabetes for that as well. Right. And so I think it's also taught me to be more self-reliant. As far as making sure and responsible. You got to take your insulin around with you everywhere. You got to make sure you don't leave it somewhere. It's very expensive. You don't want to lose it. So there's definitely, a lot of advantages to it. And if you think of it that way, if you decide that it's just, if you decide that life's not fair and that you're unhappy about it and you're just going to go moping around unhappy about it, and if you're going to use it as like a crutch or use it as an excuse, then it's not going to get you anywhere. But if you're facing a challenge, you overcome that challenge. Any challenge that you face and then overcome, I think it helps you build your resiliency, and it helps you overcome more difficult challenges in the future. So in that regards, you can think of any problem as a problem, but you can also think of it as an opportunity, as an opportunity to better yourself, which is kind of to your point about mindset. It's kind of like a little bit of a mental trick, right? So it's great. I have a friend of mine who started a business actually in the food space. He started it back in the 80s, and now they are doing $100 million a year in revenue. He employs almost 500 people.
Wow.
And I asked him, one of the things I'd asked him was like, so what do you see as the key or one of the keys to your success, and I'd also talk to him about, managing folks and hiring and people and culture, because that all becomes really important.
Part of it. Yeah, definitely. That's business,
right? Exactly. I mean, when you have 500 people underneath you, it's like you can't do everything yourself, right? I mean, like you're just like, you're trying to steer the ship. And I asked him, and one of the things he said, I never use the word problem. Instead, I use the word opportunity. So he'll go to like his, he would go to his team, no matter the size, and he'd come up and he'd say, "Hey guys, we got an opportunity," and the folks wouldn't know whether that was like a good thing or a bad thing, and they wouldn't know exactly how to react. So they kind of like cautiously lean in, like an opportunity. You say, "Huh? Like what does that mean exactly?" Right? But when you phrase it that way, you kind of get people thinking. It automatically gets thinking about, well, how are we moving forward, right? It's like a forward thinking train of thought rather than having a problem. And I think a problem is like thinking about what's blocking you, whereas an opportunity is thinking like, where can we go from here? I think it's a neat little kind of like a language-based trick to like get yourself in the right mindset and get your team on board and things like that.
Definitely, dude. Something that we actually work with a lot of people on when it comes to nutrition side of things is the wording, because realistically, people say, I can't have this, like I can't have beer, I can't have cake, and I can't have ice cream. What am I going to do? And all they take away from that is the subject. So all they're thinking about is cake, beer, and ice cream, rather than the actual factor of like, okay, we can work around this. So what we do like to talk about is swapping foods out, like making the choice to swap the food. There might be the variation that instead of having a beer, you're having a clear alcohol instead. And you're choosing an option that's a low sugar variation. And then instead of having the cake, you might choose to have like a gluten-free, dairy-free cake. It might not be as fun for some people, but it's still going to give you an option, a variation of it. And the ice cream, once again, there might be like a coconut ice cream that you can have. Like we're really blessed in the world that we live in with the amount of how spoiled we are for choice, realistically. But I think it does come down to that wording side of things, because if you put a block on it and it's about, I think, getting away, like depriving yourself of that food, that's when it becomes really, really tough. When you're empowering yourself to make that different choice, that can be such a big thing. And that's really like exactly what you're saying about the opportunity. Like, hey, you've got an opportunity here. I think that's great. I really like that story.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. We have more choice than ever. It's incredible. I think especially with food companies online, for example, you really have more choice than ever, because still, at least here in America, there really are hardly any keto products in stores. And so, but now there's like online and there's Amazon, and you can buy through people's websites, and so you can order this stuff, you can have it delivered directly to your door, and so. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts. There's like a massive amount of opportunity, and as far as think about like it's been amazing with like the like veganism, for example, and like all the nut milks that there are, and like the vegan cheeses that there are, and people are just getting better and better and better at it, and I think it's just a matter of time, that it's like there's just so many options, and I see it changing like from my perspective, and on the food side. Everything, or a lot of, I think what's happened is a lot of the technology that we have is built for, like the eating ways of like the 60s and the 70s, if that makes sense. And And so, if you're trying to be gluten-free, for example, it's much more difficult typically to make stuff without the gluten, right? Because then your dough doesn't hold together. And that can have problems with the specific equipment that you're using, in order, because then it gets sticky and then it sticks to whatever like blender you're using and so on, right? But there are ways around this. It's just that we've come up thinking that this is the way that we make food, and so now it's difficult, But no, there's lots of opportunities. I mean, it's funny because you say like, yeah, I can't eat ice cream anymore. It's like that's like, well, you have an opportunity to now pioneer a new, non-ice cream, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or coconut ice cream, or whatever you want to make. It's like it's just a way of thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely, man. And something that I've heard you talk about before is actually it comes down to, I just need to quickly, I wrote a little note about it, but being a self-taught food scientist, what did you mean by that? Like, what do you mean when you talk about being a self-taught food scientist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least I don't know what it's like in Australia, obviously, but I assume it's the same. As we have schools and we have degrees, like we have bachelor's programs, master's programs, and PhD's programs in food science, or in even specifically cereal science. And then you have folks that they take a combination of like chemistry classes and food processing classes, and they learn all about food. And then they're the ones that are usually developing products inside of large companies. And when you're starting for the first time all by yourself, like you got to learn that all of that by yourself, right? And I think that there's other parts to it. Is like one thing that I think a lot of people think about is like, well, how am I going to make this taste good, for example, right? Like, what's the flavor going to be like? But when you think about food science, it encompasses much more than that. You also think about the texture, for example, which is really important in cereal. People want like something which tastes crunchy. Like you don't want soggy cereal. You don't want like chewy cereal. Like you want crunchy cereal. And that was a big part of our cereal. And I think why so many people love it is because it's so crunchy, and it's so crunchy because I spent so much time trying to figure out how to make it that way. And there's like a whole. There are books and books and books just written about crunchiness and like how to achieve that, exactly what that sensation is like in the mouth, right? There are books that go into the cellular structure of the food and how that impacts the crunchiness, right? I was actually taking micrographs of the cereal, which is in other words doing like a MRIs basically of the cereal to understand like what the cereal looked like inside, right? And basically what you learn quickly is that when you have a product that's crunchy, it's usually crunchy because when you bite into it, you create what's very similar to an earthquake in the product itself. And that gives you that, like, pushes back on your teeth and gives you that kind of crunchy sensation. So, there's crunchiness. There's shelf life, obviously, as well. And, you're sending out products, you're selling it to customers. Like, you don't want to be harming people. And so you don't want to be sending them stuff that's moldy. You don't want to send them stuff that has gone bad or that smells bad. And so you have to think about, how are we going to address those challenges, right? And when you're baking for yourself, like, life is good. You bake it and then you eat it. But when it's sitting, in a supermarket shelf for a few days before someone buys it, like, it's got to be able to sit there and nothing goes wrong with it, right?
Can we touch on that real quick? Like on the like when it comes to shelf life side of things, like, is there some additives? And I mean, we've interviewed these chicks from Tasmania here in Australia who run a course on additive free, like talking about the different additives that can be really quite, I guess, non-favorable and really quite badly affect the human body. Is there any additives that you kind of came across when you were doing your research that you were like, wow, that's like a definite no-no for the things that you should be, I guess, for people in general should not be eating, things that you would not want in your product at all?
Yeah. I mean, so there are a lot of additives for a couple of reasons, for either shelf life or for like kind of processing. In other words, like there are additives that'll make, if you're making bread, for example, there are like industrial additives that'll make the bread rise more quickly or rise more evenly, because like people want to buy bread that looks like good, right? And if you try baking bread, it's like very difficult to make bread that's as consistently like fluffy as the bread that you buy in the store, right? And you got to almost wonder, like, how do they make it so perfect every time, right? And the reason is because they're using these additives, which really help. But I think it depends. It depends on the store. Like Whole Foods here in America, they have been really good about saying no to all of these different artificial additives that you can add to your product to help out with these things.
Yeah.
So from the get-go, I realized when I got into this world that those were not going to be something that I was going to really touch, if you will. Shelf life is one. Like, it depends. So for shelf life, you first have to think about like what's the challenge exactly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the challenge is like rancidity, where it starts to smell bad, like the fat goes bad after it oxidizes. Other times you have challenge where like mold is growing inside of the protein bar or whatever it is, right? So depending on the specific shelf life challenge, there are companies that typically have additives that you can just, it's the best thing for if you're like trying to make a product and you're like, oh, but it goes moldy, and a company comes to you and like says, hey, you just add a little bit of this ingredient, sprinkle this on, and it won't go moldy anymore. You're like, okay, that's great, makes life easy.
Opportunity.
But yeah, a lot of exactly. But a lot of those can have or artificial ingredients, that folks are not necessarily paying as much attention to. But all sorts of things like that that companies can put in their food products.
Definitely. So has there been, like, for you guys, what are the main ones that you use for those exact reasons, like to make sure that rancidity isn't a thing and making sure that shelf life is a thing? Like, how do you do that? What products are you guys using?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so one of the first things is that when I first started making the cereal, I was making it using almond flour as the base. And that almond flour is very difficult from a rancidity perspective because almonds have a lot of fat. And so, and specifically, when you use almond flour, you're then baking that fat, which is like rising the temperature, and that's causing it to oxidize very quickly. So once you bake something with almond flour, you're typically not going to be able to just put it in a package and then just like let it sit there for a long period of time, because you've like baked like a highly, something that has a lot of certain types of fats in it. So that was, for example, one of the challenges that we faced. And what we ended up doing is actually moving to now having a pea protein based cereal, for example. So we're using pea protein instead of almond flour, for among those things for that reason. So I think you basically have two solutions, which is either you can add things to your product, or you can change the profile of the product or how you make the product in order to get around it, right? Like, for example, you can think about, well, maybe we can do like a no-bake bar, for example, right? And then maybe if the bar is not baked, then the almond flour does not get heated, and then it doesn't cause the fat to go rancid, right? So those are the levers you have. It's like you can change the ingredients, you can change your baking process or whatever the cooking process is, if there is one, or you can add additives. So those are kind of the three possibilities. We don't really currently add anything to the product that is for that is for shelf life extension per se. The other, actually, one thing on this point is, so there, for example, we use sunflower oil as part of the product. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but there are three types of sunflower oil. There's high oleic sunflower oil, there's mid oleic sunflower, and there's linoleic sunflower oil. And these are different ratios of monounsaturated versus polyunsaturated fatty acids in the sunflower oil. And a lot of folks get angry about sunflower oil because of the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. But in reality, that's very prevalent in linoleic sunflower oil, not very prevalent at all in high oleic sunflower oil. And it just so happens that high oleic sunflower oil tends to go rancid much less quickly than the linoleic sunflower oil does. And the reason is just due to the different compensation of fats. Like, different fats go rancid more and less quickly depending on, their given structure. And so when I had realized that, high oleic sunflower oil, obviously, as you might expect, is the most expensive of the three. It's the one that, unless it says on the packaging high oleic sunflower oil, they're probably not using high oleic sunflower oil, right? But we started using high oleic sunflower oil for exactly that reason, because it can last a lot longer. And not just that reason, also due to the fatty acid composition, but it's one of those. It's another thing you can do is you can change up the whatever you want to call the variation of sunflower oil that you're using or whatnot in order to address some of those concerns.
The issue with that is that it is cheap. Like the linoleic is the cheap one, so that's why it is the most widely used product, and that's when it does get a bad name, like you're talking about. And there is a lot of studies on linoleic sunflower oil by itself because they noticed that there was something going on with it, and so they really kind of looked into it. But unfortunately, like we said, it is the cheaper of the lot, so it's definitely the most used as well. Because unfortunately, companies kind of look at it as like, how can we cut costs? Like, where can we save some options? And this is where we can save it. So yeah, it's just one of those things.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's difficult because we have obviously like cereal folks have a perception of what the price of the cereal is going to be, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're typically buying like Cocoa Puffs at the grocery store, you could be buying it for like $2, like $3, like for this big box, right? And then like Catalina Crunch, obviously, a lot more expensive on that, from that perspective, right? Yeah. And so some folks, I think that just don't get it as much or have thought about it as much. They're kind of asking, so why does Cocoa Puffs cost this much and yours cost this much? And it's like, well, sugar costs about 15 cents per pound. So like sugar is like super cheap, and like Cocoa Puffs is almost half sugar. So like half of that box of Cocoa Puffs is like 15 cents per pound, right? Whereas, we're using monk fruit instead to sweeten the product. And, our monk fruit costs about $350 a pound. So like, there's a reason why we're spending more money, right?
Yeah.
And like same thing with wheat flour. Like wheat flour in America typically is about 35 cents per pound. Pea protein we use costs about, $6 to $7 a pound. So we're talking again about like 10 to 20 fold increase in price, right? And you have a similar sort of thing with the sunflower oil where I think it's like linoleic is around 25 cents per pound. High oleic can be $1 to $1.50 per pound. Yeah. And so, you're talking about 5 times or 10 times as much money that you're going to be spending on these ingredients, right? So people sometimes they think that we're like just trying to extort them basically. When in reality, like, we're trying to invest in things that are better for you, but then are not not as cheap.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that people do have to come to terms with for themselves. Like, if you prefer to spend, and really, you can save yourself a lot of money by not going out and having 10 drinks on the weekend. Like, if you go out to a bar and have 10 drinks, that's $100 gone straight away. Whereas that's $100 you could have put towards your health. And realistically, health is an investment. Like, every time you go and you pay for a gym membership, that's an investment in your health. Every time you go and you put some good food and you buy a better quality food, that's really an investment into your health. And that's why things like, unfortunately, organic stuff is becoming more and more expensive, but at the same time, it is that investment into your health. And there is lots of ways that you can do it cheaper. And I think like bulk buying, like with you guys, you've got, for instance, when you sign up, so you're getting the constant purchase. It's obviously valuable to you because you can see that the customer is going to be returning, but you also give them a good discount based on that. So things like that, there's definitely ways that you can like bulk buy or order consistently that is going to help you out as a consumer. It's just about budgeting it in to make sure that it's going to work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I was, another thing I was thinking about was like, sometimes like it's like you can buy the Cocoa Puffs, for example, and you can just eat that all day long. But like in the long run, you're going to be probably spending a lot more on like drugs and procedures and whatnot, right? So it's like
people to wipe creases
cheap now, but cheap now, but it's not going to be cheap in the future, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. And we have like a whole sort of thing where because you're right, like if you buy, like shipping costs are very expensive, obviously, and so. If you buy in bulk from us, you save a lot of money just as a result of not having to have it like shipped all the time, right?
Yeah.
So we have a lot of customers who are actually buying 3 months once they find out they like the cereal, they'll go ahead and they'll buy 3 or 4 months of cereal like in one purchase. You know what I'm saying? And then you get that all shipped to you in one go, and it enables us to save a lot, and so we pass that savings on to you.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's like realistically, you think of anyone who goes to something like Costco who bulk buys anyway, it's just the same thing, really. It's just doing it online instead. Something you were talking about before is your pea protein. When it comes to pea protein, and this is something I haven't really looked into a lot. I work pretty closely with some pea protein companies. Like they send us the pea protein, and we advertise the pea protein a lot because
Gotcha.
it is a good product. I also work with like hemp proteins as well. But when it comes to pea protein, like is there much of a difference? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say, is there a difference when it's called pea protein? Like, is there something you should be looking out for to make sure it's a good quality pea protein compared to just getting a pea protein? Like, what's the difference in the products itself?
Oh, you mean between the different types of, like, the different suppliers of pea protein? You mean?
Yeah,
Like
realistically, like just because it says pea protein, it doesn't mean it's going to be
Yeah.
good, right? So what are you looking for in a good pea protein as such?
Gotcha. Well, I'd say a few things. One is if you're going to like a GNC or a vitamin shop or whatnot, and you're buying a protein powder, I guess, which is called pea protein, first thing you want to look at is like, is it just pea protein, or like, is there other stuff in it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the easiest way to do that is to look at the ingredients, and then also look at the amount of protein per serving and look at how that compares to the serving size, right?
Yeah.
Like if you look in it and you see that like a scoop of protein is 30 grams and that's a serving size, but only 20 grams of pea protein, well, like what's the other 10 grams, right?
Yeah,
Like it's
exactly.
something else, right?
Yeah.
And so, like folks sometimes don't realize that they'll get like a chocolate flavored pea protein, and really it's 10 grams of pea protein, 10 grams of sugar, and some chocolate as well, right?
Yeah.
And it tastes great, but it's not just pea protein,
Yeah.
So that's like a classic, like a trick, I guess, that some companies have used, which is like, just because it says pea protein doesn't mean that it's 100% pea protein. So you have to be clear if that's what you're looking for or not. I mean, if you're looking for a chocolate shake that has pea protein, then that's that. But if you're looking for pea protein, then I think I would just first make sure that it's just pea protein.
Yeah.
After that, I would say, from my perspective, honestly, the next most important thing is most of the pea proteins come from one of 4 countries, either the U.S., Canada, Europe, typically like Belgium, France, that area, Belgium, France, Germany, or come from China. And so, there's been a lot of controversy over buying things from China because they have a history of, paying off officials to certify products when they're reality adding fillers to it in order to make money, right?
Yeah. Or like genetically modifying and saying that it's not genetically modified, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. There's a lot of distrust around Chinese ingredients. For that reason, there are several stores in America which will not allow you to put your product in the store if you're using any Chinese suppliers of ingredients. So that's a big thing. So I would say if you are looking for a pea protein, I would strongly advise to avoid one that is from China because you don't know that you're really getting what you're getting, and even the company might not know that they're really getting what they're getting. So that would be another one. And then I think, aside from that, you have what you mentioned, which is you have non-GMO pea protein versus GMO pea protein, and then you have pea proteins which are organic versus pea proteins which are not organic. And then I mean, I think those are the main things to be considering.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when it comes to talking about a pea protein by itself, like when you say, for instance, like a flavored pea protein, some people just really find it quite grainy or like earthy, I think is the word that people typically use around the taste of it. And I think if it was too far away from that you would know that it's not really a great product, because when you look at what a pea is, or where you're getting the protein from, it is coming from a plant. So at the end of the day, you do kind of want it to be a little bit that way. And if it's got too many extras in it, that's when it's going to taste really sweet and really flavorsome, and not necessarily very healthful for the body potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're getting it as tasting like a chocolate milkshake, there's something in there besides pea protein. You know what I'm saying? Absolutely. But yeah, no, I mean, to your point, pea protein, I think to varying degrees, because it also depends on where the peas are coming from, right? So different pea harvests from different countries around the world actually have different tastes to them.
Yes.
But for the most part, yes, like peas taste like peas. And so you're going to be having either, I think we would call it either earthy or grassy notes, to the flavor profile. And I mean, the companies have done work on a couple dimensions. One is actually, as far as the protein, I don't know if you remember this, but like probably like 10, 15 years ago, every protein bar would taste really like sandy on your mouth. And it would just like, you just like eat it, and then there'd just be this like sand or like chalk that would just like sit on your tongue, right? And so they've gotten good, for example, at making the protein more soluble on the tongue, so that it just absorbs into your tongue, like into the mouth, like from your saliva, right? Like rather than just kind of sitting there and things like that. So there are definitely companies that are working on making these things taste better. And so, another thing that we've found, for example, is like, yes, so the pea protein has a little bit of a pea taste to it, but like folks don't want to eat pea tasting cereal, obviously. Now, the one thing that you realize though is that like when you're adding other flavors to the product, they like some flavors can like complement the taste of peas. Other flavors can exacerbate the taste of peas, and then other flavors can like hide the taste of peas, right? So like, for example, we have cinnamon toast cereal, and cinnamon is like a super loud flavor. Like it will, you won't taste anything else if you eat enough cinnamon. You know what I'm saying? Like you just taste cinnamon. So like that's one example of like the things that you can do. Another flavor we have, our first flavor, actually chocolate, worked forever to make this taste good, because chocolate just like sort of exacerbates the negative grassy qualities of the pea protein. And so it is difficult to make chocolate go well with peas. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure that one out, like getting different cacaos from different parts of the world, seeing how they mixed with the pea protein, like a whole bunch of time working on that problem.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to like adding sweeteners as such, like a stevia or a xylitol, like an alcohol sugar instead, is that something that you kind of had to have a look at as well? Like, and obviously with the alcohol sugars, there's some that are less favorable than others with the way that responds. Like some of them will literally, your body will not process them at all, and so it just gets kind of stuck in your system and going. It eventually gets just turned to waste, but it goes through, and your body has to digest the food around it essentially and break it down from what it is, and then it has to put it into the waste product, and it comes out exactly how it went in essentially. Was that something that you kind of really looked into, as the sweetness side of things as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because the number one thing is that any one of those sweeteners, none of them taste exactly like sugar, right? They vary in quality, and you can do different. Like, there's a lot of work that we are doing and that other companies are doing to make it taste more like how you would taste just like a regular sugary product, because that's the goal, right? Like,
exactly.
You just want to taste exactly like what people want and are used to, right? You don't want it tasting differently, really. So we are constantly evaluating different possibilities, when it comes to how we're going to add sweetness to the product. I kind of make a distinction between, I would kind of put these into three buckets, right? The sources of sweetness is like, one is you have stevia and monk fruit being what we use, which are like natural high-intensity sweeteners. So they're typically 150 to 300 times sweeter than sugar is. Then have sugar alcohols, like your xylitol, malitol, erythritol, and so on. These are typically actually less sweet than sugar. So these are typically about 70% of the sweetness of sugar. And then obviously in the third bucket, you have like your artificial sweeteners, like your sucralose, and other, things like that you're going to find in Diet Coke and whatnot, right? Now, the key kind of difference between the first two categories is the actual intensity of the sweetness. So when you think about it, given the monk fruit, for example, is 300 times sweeter than sugar, if you were taking a recipe and say the recipe called for 1 cup of sugar, you're now going to substitute it for 1/300th of a cup of monk fruit, right? Whereas if your recipe calls for 1 cup of sugar and you want to substitute malitol, you're now going to be using almost 2 cups of malitol to replace that 1 cup of sugar, right? And what that does from a nutritional standpoint is that if you're deciding you're going to eat 1 bowl of cereal, you only have so much, like that weighs a certain amount, right? And like, if half of it is malitol, now you're eating half malitol for breakfast, right? Which you know, even if you can say that it does not, you know, it's not digested by the system and whatnot, and so, you know, they're like different folks with different perspectives on you know, whether it should be counted as net carb, like towards net carbs or not, in that whole discussion. But for me, I think it's kind of moot, because it's like, even if you don't feel like it's being digested, you're still just eating a bunch of malitol for breakfast, and you could be eating protein, like you could be eating fiber, you could be eating healthy fats, right? Like all that stuff that you could be eating, you're instead just putting malitol into your body, right? And then to your other point is that, yes, those things can cause bloating in people, cause indigestion, cause you to feel uncomfortable. And so we don't use any of those for those reasons. And that's why we use monk fruit, is it's just so much sweeter than sugar is. You use it in like a really, really small amount. And so it still leaves a lot of room for your cereal bowl to have a lot of protein, a lot of fiber, and a lot of the healthy fats that you're looking to eat, that you would want to eat. You know,
on a side note, I've got a friend who's doing his PhD on monk fruit, and just they're claiming it to be like such a superfood, like the crazy amounts of things and benefits that they're going to get from it. It's kind of like, I talk to him every once in a while. I haven't talked to him for about 6 months based on it, but they were pretty much trying to say like how they could bring monk fruit in to be like pretty much a substitute for a lot of things, like such as sugar, but just because of its inflammatory properties and bits and pieces, and really comes down to the weight loss side of things. They really feel that if they can get into more products, that they really won't have that high epidemic that we do when it comes to unhealthiness or obesity. I think is the big thing they're trying to overcome, due to it just being so much less in calories compared to what the sugars are.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I did not realize there was someone studying it full time for their PhD thesis. That's crazy, that's exciting, man.
Yeah, kind of cool. And it's actually I think it's actually sponsored by the university. Like I think he even gets paid money to be doing it, which is really cool. So yeah, quite a crazy.
That's
thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Krishna, dude, I think this has been awesome. Like, there's been a lot of insights, and I think one thing that really kind of gets me is that I've got a lot of friends and family, and even just people that I work with through our business that are really conscious about health and wellness themselves, but potentially don't take it on board for their kids, which kind of baffles me, because realistically, you'd want them to be feeling as good as what you're feeling as well. In my mind, that's how I think. So I think one thing that you're trying to really bring forward to the world is that you can eat incredibly good tasting food, and you can have a healthful option whilst doing that. Like, healthy doesn't mean it has to be boring. There is definitely creative ways around it, and that's exactly what you guys are doing through Catalina Crunch. And I feel realistically, if we can get like the younger generation onto things like this and not cocoa puffs, despite the cost difference, like, I feel that the health is well worth the investment. So I'd like to say thank you, dude, for what you're doing. I think it's really cool, and I really appreciate the conversation that we've had, because I think it will be incredibly insightful for people that are listening.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed the conversation as well, and I hope to be back soon.
Good, man. Where can people follow along? Where can we follow along to find out when you come to Australia, so we can devour Catalina Crunch?
Absolutely. We don't sell it in Australia right now, unfortunately, but you can go to CatalinaCrunch.com actually and sign up for our newsletter in the bottom of the feed, and then we would obviously let you know when we do launch in Australia. It is in the works. It is in the works.
That's awesome, man. It's definitely one thing that I've been doing for years is listening to podcasts, and every time I hear of a product like this, I wait until I get to the States so I can go and buy it, so I can trial it out. Because like things like the perfect food bars, when I used to hear people talk about them nonstop, and then when I went to the States, we bought like bulk of the perfect food bars. I was so excited. Catalina Crunch has made the list, dude. Next time in the States, I'm bulk buying.
Awesome. All right, sounds good. Hey, maybe you should open up a distribution company.
Yeah, exactly. It could be worthwhile.
That's what they do.
we can actually talk. We've got some people that could help you out, definitely, with that. Cool.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks, Krishna.
Yep, thank you.
All right, let's start. Oh, just wait a second. All right, all done. Thanks, heaps, man. That was cool.
Yeah, no worries. So I have written down. Did you want me to introduce you to the guy that was working with that protein company on
Yeah, man, I'd
on the
love that.
sleep
That'd be really
thing?
cool. That'd be
Okay.
really, really cool. I also, yeah, I definitely know some people here in Australia. Like, I know a guy who's pretty much like the main distributor for a lot of different plant-based and or just protein options and stuff in general. Like he's got a company that's all a pea-based protein, and
Okay.
his company over like that's one part of it, but on the other side of it is that they do distribution around Australia completely. And they've
Yeah.
got another guy who creates products from scratch, and he's got his own kitchen and everything. They can make it from scratch and build it up based on what the
Oh wow.
product is, obviously. So, I mean, there's definitely some introductions if you wanted. I don't know where you guys are at with bringing it over and what exactly the extents are, but I could definitely introduce you to a few people that might be able to help out with that.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I think probably in like January of next year or so is when we'll be well set up to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, cool.
So I will. I'll certainly let you know on that front.
Yeah, definitely. I think Brock, the guy that does the distribution stuff, I think he'd be very helpful because he's done it from start to finish with multiple companies now. Like he's kind of found a few different companies that were doing all right on the online space, but not really getting distribution the way that they should have been throughout Australia. So he's kind of helped them to really skyrocket. So, I mean, even if he can point you in the right direction of which way you should be going over here, because obviously it's going to be a little bit different to what's happening there. It could be worthwhile for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that.
All right, no worries at all, man. That was a good chat. I really enjoyed it. It's good to talk business, but also get to talk health. It's nice.
Yeah, me as well.
Yeah,
All right, I'm gonna go get myself a better background here. But cool, man. Great chatting with you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, man.
And
You too.
I will talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, mate. See ya.
Oh, by the way, message me your email so I can introduce you to Nick over at Prehype.
Cool. I'll send it straight away.
All right, sounds good.
All right,
See you later.
man. See ya.